Listen to me now, and listen closely. What I'm about to share with you is not theory. It's not speculation. It's not borrowed wisdom from books you'll never read. This is the truth about how a single conversation, a single moment of clarity, can shatter the prison walls you've been living behind for years. And if you stay with me, truly stay with me through every word I speak, you will understand why most men die without ever living, and why you don't have to be one of them. There was a young man, let's call him David, 26 years old, capable, intelligent, but lost. Not the kind of lost you can see on a map. The kind of lost that lives in the chest, that wakes you at 3 a.m., that makes you question whether any of this effort, any of this struggle is worth it. He had tried and failed, tried again and failed again. And with each failure, a little more of his fire dimmed until he was simply going through the motions, surviving but not living, breathing but not believing. One evening, in a small town where nobody knew his name and nobody cared about his dreams, David sat alone on a bench overlooking a quiet lake. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful, yes, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in the maze of his own disappointment, and that's when he appeared. An old man, walking slowly with a cane, eyes sharp despite his age, carrying himself with a dignity that seemed out of place in such a simple setting. The old man sat down beside David without asking permission. For a long moment neither spoke. Then the old man said something that would change everything. "You look like a man who's forgotten what he's capable of." David didn't respond at first. He was used to people offering empty encouragement, meaningless phrases that bounced off the surface of his pain without touching the depth. But something in this man's voice was different. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't pity. It was knowing. "I don't know what I'm capable of anymore," David finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. The old man nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "That's because you've been measuring yourself by the wrong standard. You think success is about results, about outcomes, about what the world gives you in return for your effort. But I'll tell you what no one else will. Success isn't what happens to you. Success is what happens in you. And until you understand that distinction, you'll spend your entire life chasing shadows." David turned to look at the old man, really look at him. There was something in those eyes, something that suggested this wasn't just an old man sharing philosophy. This was someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side. "What do you mean?" David asked. The old man smiled faintly. "Tell me something. When you wake up in the morning, what's the first thought that enters your mind?" David didn't have to think about it. "Usually I'm already tired, already worried about what might go wrong, already doubting whether today will be any different from yesterday." The old man nodded again, as if he'd expected exactly that answer. "And there's your problem. You lose the day before you even begin it, because the battle isn't out there in the world. The battle is in here." He tapped his temple gently. "In the mind. And until you win that battle, nothing else matters."
Before we continue, take a second to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support keeps us going and helps us bring more stories like this to light. While you're here, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I'm always curious to see how far these stories reach.
The conversation that followed wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic, but it was surgical in its precision. The old man spoke with the kind of clarity that comes only from experience, from having made every mistake and learned every lesson the hard way. He told David about discipline, not the kind of discipline that feels like punishment, but the kind that sets you free. He spoke about the morning, about how the first hour after you wake determines the altitude of your entire day. He explained that most people surrender their power before their feet even touch the floor, allowing their thoughts to run wild like undisciplined children, entertaining every fear, every doubt, every limitation that their mind wants to present. "The mind is like a garden," the old man said. "Whatever you plant, it will grow. If you plant doubt, you'll harvest failure. If you plant fear, you'll harvest paralysis. But if you plant purpose, if you plant discipline, if you plant unwavering faith in your own capability, then you'll harvest results that will make your current circumstances look like a distant memory." David felt something shift inside him. Not a massive transformation, not yet, but a crack in the armor of his despair. "How?" he asked. "How do I change what I've been doing for years?" The old man leaned back on the bench, his cane resting against his knee. "You don't change years, you change mornings. One morning at a time, every single day, before the world speaks to you, you speak to yourself. You declare who you are, you affirm your purpose. You command your mind to align with your vision instead of your circumstances. And you do this not once, not when you feel like it, but every single morning without exception." He continued, "Most men are lazy with their thoughts. They allow anything and everything to enter their consciousness. They wake up and immediately check their phones, filling their minds with other people's agendas, other people's problems, other people's noise. And then they wonder why they feel scattered, why they feel powerless, why they feel like life is happening to them instead of for them." David sat forward, his attention fully captured now. "What would you have me do?" The old man's eyes gleamed. "Tomorrow morning, before you do anything else, before you touch your phone, before you speak to another person, I want you to stand in front of a mirror and speak these words out loud. 'I am the master of my fate. I command my mind, my actions, my results. Today I will move with purpose. Today I will act with discipline. Today I will refuse to surrender to doubt.' Say it with conviction. Say it like your life depends on it, because it does." David nodded slowly, but the old man wasn't finished. And here's what most people don't understand. The words without the feeling are worthless. You must speak with emotion. You must feel the power of what you're declaring. Your subconscious mind responds not to logic, but to emotion. When you combine words with deep feeling, you give instructions that your entire being must follow. This is not wishful thinking. This is the law of mind. And if you obey it, your life will change. David went home that night with something he hadn't felt in months: hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind of hope that crumbles at the first sign of resistance, but the kind of hope that comes from understanding, from seeing a path forward where there had been only darkness. The next morning, he woke before dawn. His first instinct was to reach for his phone, to check messages, to scroll mindlessly. But he remembered the old man's words. He got out of bed, walked to the mirror, and looked at himself. For a moment, he felt foolish. Talking to yourself in a mirror seemed like something out of a self-help book written by someone who had never actually struggled. But then he remembered the old man's eyes, the certainty in his voice, the knowing that came from lived experience. And so David spoke. "I am the master of my fate." His voice was uncertain at first, barely more than a whisper. He tried again, louder this time. "I am the master of my fate. I command my mind, my actions, my results." Something strange began to happen. As he spoke the words, as he looked into his own eyes and declared his intention, he felt a shift, not external, internal, a straightening of the spine, a clearing of the fog, a remembering of who he was beneath all the failure and disappointment. He continued, adding his own words now, speaking from a place deeper than thought. "Today I will move with purpose. I will not wait for circumstances to change. I will change my response to circumstances. I will act with discipline, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. I will refuse to surrender to doubt, to fear, to the voice that tells me I'm not enough." By the time he finished, his heart was pounding, not from fear, but from something else: power. The kind of power that comes from taking command of the one thing you actually control, yourself. He got dressed, made his coffee, and began his day. And for the first time in months, he moved with intention instead of dread. The work that usually felt heavy seemed lighter. The challenges that usually overwhelmed him seemed manageable. Not because anything external had changed, but because everything internal had shifted. Days turned into weeks. David maintained his morning ritual without fail. Some days it felt powerful. Other days it felt like going through the motions. But he did it anyway, because he was beginning to understand something profound. Discipline isn't about feeling. Discipline is about doing, regardless of feeling. The old man had been right. The battle was in the mind. And every morning David was winning that battle before it could even begin. He started noticing changes. Small at first, then impossible to ignore. His posture changed. He walked with his head up instead of down. His voice changed. He spoke with certainty instead of apology. His decisions changed. He stopped hesitating, stopped second-guessing every move, stopped waiting for permission from a world that was never going to grant it. The results followed, not overnight, not magically, but inevitably. The business idea he had abandoned months ago suddenly seemed possible again. The connections he had written off as lost opportunities began to resurface. The energy he thought was gone forever started flowing back into his life. But the most profound change wasn't in his circumstances. It was in his identity. David was no longer a man waiting for life to happen to him. He was a man making life happen through him. He had become, through consistent daily practice, through unwavering commitment to his morning ritual, someone he barely recognized. And that recognition filled him with a quiet confidence that no amount of external success could ever provide. 3 months after that first evening by the lake, David returned to the same bench. He hoped to find the old man again, to thank him, to tell him what had changed. And as if summoned by intention, the old man appeared, walking slowly with his cane, the same knowing look in his eyes. "You came back," the old man said, sitting down beside him. David smiled. "I had to. I needed to tell you what happened." The old man held up a hand. "I don't need to hear it. I can see it. You walk differently. You speak differently. You carry yourself like a man who remembers his power." David nodded. "The morning ritual. It changed everything. But I have to ask, why did you help me? Why did you share this with a stranger?" The old man was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of years. "Because once I was you. Sitting on a bench, defeated, lost, convinced that my life was over at 27, and an old man sat beside me and shared the same truth I shared with you. He told me that success is an inside job, that the morning determines the day, that discipline is the bridge between who you are and who you're capable of becoming. I didn't believe him at first, but I was desperate enough to try, and it saved my life." He turned to look at David directly. "You see, son, wisdom is meant to be passed on, not hoarded, not kept secret. The greatest gift you can give to someone who's lost is not sympathy. It's truth. And the truth is this: no matter how far you've fallen, no matter how many times you've failed, you always have one more morning, one more chance to speak power into your life, one more opportunity to command your mind instead of being commanded by it." David felt his throat tighten. "What do I do now? How do I keep this going?" The old man smiled. "You do exactly what you've been doing. You protect your morning like it's sacred ground. You speak your truth every single day. You refuse to let the world's chaos become your chaos. And when you're strong enough, when you've built yourself into the man you were always meant to be, you do what I did. You find someone who's lost, and you tell them the truth. Let me break this down for you now, because what I'm about to say is the foundation that every great achievement is built upon. Your morning is not neutral. It's not idle time. It's not the warm-up before the real day begins. Your morning is the battlefield where you either win or lose the day before most people even wake up. The first thoughts you think, the first words you speak, the first actions you take, these set the frequency for everything that follows. Think about it. How do most people start their day? They wake up exhausted, already behind, already stressed. They grab their phone and flood their consciousness with news, with social media, with other people's agendas. They let the external world dictate their internal state before they've even had a chance to establish what that internal state should be. And then they wonder why they feel powerless, why they feel reactive, why they feel like they're always playing defense instead of offense. But the man who masters his morning masters his life. He understands that the first hour belongs to him and him alone. No phone, no email, no external input, just him, his mind, and his purpose. This is when he speaks his definite chief aim. This is when he affirms his power. This is when he commands his subconscious mind to align with his vision. And because he does this every single day without exception, his subconscious has no choice but to obey. Your subconscious mind is like a faithful servant. It doesn't question your orders. It doesn't judge whether your commands are wise or foolish. It simply takes what you give it with emotion and consistency and begins to manifest it in your physical reality. This is not mysticism. This is mental law, and it works with mathematical precision. When you wake up and immediately declare, "I am the master of my fate. I command my mind, my actions, my results," you're not engaging in positive thinking. You're engaging in mental programming. You're writing code into your subconscious that will run all day long, influencing your decisions, your perceptions, your actions. But here's what separates those who transform their lives from those who merely understand the concept: consistency. Anyone can do this once. Anyone can have one powerful morning where they speak their truth and feel inspired, but inspiration without discipline is just entertainment. What matters is whether you show up tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. What matters is whether you maintain this practice when you don't feel like it, when results haven't shown up yet, when doubt creeps back in. David learned this the hard way. There were mornings when he woke up and everything in him resisted. The voice of his old self whispered that this was pointless, that words in a mirror couldn't change reality, that he was fooling himself. But he had made a commitment, not to the old man, not to some external authority, to himself. And he had learned that every time he kept that commitment, especially when it was hard, he built a little more trust with himself. He proved to his subconscious that he was a man of his word. This is the secret that most self-help gurus won't tell you, because it's not sexy, it's not exciting, it's not the kind of thing that makes for viral content. The secret is boring consistency. The secret is showing up every single day and doing the work even when there's no immediate payoff. The secret is understanding that transformation is not an event, it's a process. And that process is built one morning at a time. Think of it this way. If you wanted to build a house, you wouldn't pour the foundation, build one wall, and then quit because you couldn't see the finished product yet. You would understand that every brick matters, that every nail counts, that the accumulation of small, consistent actions eventually produces something magnificent. Your life works the same way. Every morning you invest in yourself, you're laying another brick. You may not see the structure taking shape immediately, but it's there. And one day, you'll look back and realize you've built something unshakable. Now let me tell you about the power of speaking aloud. This is crucial. There's a vast difference between thinking about something and speaking it. When you think a thought, it remains internal, abstract, easy to dismiss. But when you speak that thought out loud, you activate different neural pathways. You engage your auditory system. You hear yourself declaring your truth, and that hearing creates a feedback loop that amplifies the message. The subconscious mind responds powerfully to spoken words, especially when combined with emotion. This is why David's practice was so effective. He didn't just think about being the master of his fate. He declared it, he commanded it, he spoke it into existence with conviction. And his subconscious mind, being the faithful servant it is, accepted that declaration as instruction and began reorganizing his entire reality to match it. But it has to be done with feeling. Words without emotion are like seeds without water. They won't grow. You must speak your affirmations, your declarations, your commands with intensity, with fire, with absolute conviction. Even if you don't fully believe it yet, speak as if you do. Because here's the beautiful paradox. You don't speak it because you believe it. You believe it because you speak it. The repetition creates the belief. The consistency creates the conviction. The daily practice creates the transformation. When David first started, he felt ridiculous, standing in front of a mirror, talking to himself like some kind of motivational speaker. But he pushed through that discomfort. He remembered the old man's words, "Your comfort zone is a prison, and the only way to escape it is to do what makes you uncomfortable until it becomes comfortable." So he spoke every morning, with increasing power, with growing emotion, with undeniable conviction, and slowly, imperceptibly at first, then undeniably, he became the man he was declaring himself to be. Here's what nobody tells you about transformation. It doesn't stay contained. When you change, everything around you changes. David noticed this within weeks. His relationships shifted. People who used to drain his energy either disappeared or adjusted their behavior. New people showed up, people who resonated with his new frequency. His work improved. Not because he was working harder, but because he was working with clarity, with purpose, with focus. The scattered, desperate energy that had characterized his previous efforts was replaced by calm, powerful intention. Opportunities appeared, not by magic, but because he was now someone who could recognize and seize opportunities. His entire perception had changed. Where he once saw obstacles, he now saw possibilities. Where he once felt overwhelmed, he now felt challenged. Where he once wanted to quit, he now wanted to push harder. This wasn't positive thinking. This was the natural result of consistent mental discipline. He had reprogrammed his mind, and his mind was now reprogramming his reality. But the most profound shift was internal. David no longer needed external validation to feel worthy. He no longer waited for circumstances to give him permission to be confident. He had built an unshakable foundation within himself, a foundation that no failure, no setback, no criticism could touch. Because that foundation wasn't built on results. It was built on discipline, on keeping promises to himself, on showing up every single morning and declaring his power regardless of what happened yesterday. Let me tell you something that took me years to understand. Self-mastery is not about perfection. It's about direction. It's not about never falling. It's about always getting back up. David had days when he missed his morning ritual, days when life threw him off course, days when he felt like he was back at square one. But he had learned something invaluable from the old man's wisdom. Failure is not falling down. Failure is staying down. So when he missed a morning, he didn't spiral into self-judgment. He didn't use it as evidence that he was broken or that this practice didn't work. He simply returned the next morning. He picked up where he left off. He refused to let a single missed day become a missed week, a missed month, a missed life. This is the discipline that separates the successful from the struggling. Not the absence of mistakes, but the speed of recovery. Not the perfection of execution, but the persistence of effort. And here's the beautiful part. The longer David maintained his practice, the easier it became. The morning ritual that once felt forced and unnatural began to feel like the most natural thing in the world. His body started waking up before his alarm. His mind started craving that early morning clarity. The declarations that once felt like lies began to feel like truth, because they had become truth through repetition, through consistency, through unwavering commitment. This is how you reprogram a lifetime of conditioning, not through a single explosive effort, but through 1,000 small, consistent efforts, not through dramatic transformation, but through daily evolution. Not through waiting for motivation, but through creating discipline that generates its own momentum. The man who understands this becomes unstoppable, not because he never faces obstacles, but because he has built the mental infrastructure to overcome any obstacle. 6 months after that first conversation by the lake, David's life was unrecognizable. He had rebuilt his business, stronger and smarter than before. He had cultivated relationships that lifted him instead of draining him. He had developed a confidence that wasn't arrogant, but unshakable. But more importantly, he had become someone he was proud to be. And that pride didn't come from what he had accomplished. It came from who he had become in the process of accomplishing it. The old man's words had proven true in ways David couldn't have imagined. Success really was an inside job. The morning really did determine the day. Discipline really was the bridge between current reality and desired destiny. And the power to transform his life really had been within him all along, waiting to be activated through consistent, disciplined practice. One evening, David returned to the bench by the lake one final time. He sat alone, watching the sunset paint the sky in those same golds and crimsons, but this time he wasn't lost. He wasn't defeated. He wasn't wondering if his life would ever change. He knew it already had, and he knew it would continue to change as long as he maintained the practice that had given him back his power. As he sat there, a young woman approached, moving slowly, her shoulders slumped, her eyes distant. She sat on the other end of the bench without saying anything. David recognized that look. He had worn it himself not so long ago. And in that moment, he understood why the old man had shared his wisdom. It wasn't just to save David. It was to create a chain of transformation that would continue long after the old man was gone. David turned to the young woman and said gently, "You look like someone who's forgotten what they're capable of." She looked at him, surprised, a hint of tears in her eyes. And David smiled, knowing that he was about to change someone's life forever, just as his had been changed, with a single conversation, with a simple truth, with the power of the morning. And now I speak directly to you, you who are listening to these words right now. You are not here by accident. You are not hearing this message because of some random algorithm. You are here because something in you knows it's time. Time to stop making excuses. Time to stop waiting for circumstances to change. Time to stop surrendering your power to fear, to doubt, to the voices that tell you you're not enough. The truth I've shared with you today is not complex. It's not secret knowledge hidden in ancient texts. It's simple, direct, and proven. Your morning determines your day. Your thoughts create your reality. Your discipline builds your destiny. But simple doesn't mean easy, and knowing doesn't equal doing. The question is not whether you understand this truth. The question is whether you will live it. Tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before you speak to anyone, before you allow the world to tell you who you are, stand in front of a mirror and declare your power. Say it out loud. I am the master of my fate. I command my mind, my actions, my results. Today I move with purpose. Today I act with discipline. Today I refuse to surrender to doubt. Say it with emotion. Say it with conviction. Say it like your entire future depends on it, because it does. Do this for 30 days without missing a single morning, not because you feel like it, not because you see immediate results, but because you've decided to become someone who keeps commitments to themselves, someone who builds power through consistency, someone who refuses to live as a victim of circumstances. And if you do this, if you truly commit to this practice, I promise you something will shift. Not maybe, not hopefully, will, because this is law, and law doesn't negotiate. The conversation that changed David's life can change yours too. Not because there's magic in the words, but because there's power in the practice. Not because you need saving, but because you need awakening. You already have everything you need. You always did. You just forgot. And now you remember. The morning is your battlefield. Your mind is your weapon. Your discipline is your destiny. The only question that remains is this: will you show up tomorrow morning and begin? Your life will not change until you change. Your circumstances will not shift until your consciousness shifts. Your future will not improve until your present improves. And all of that begins with a single morning, a single declaration, a single decision to stop being who you've been and start becoming who you're capable of being. The power is yours. It always was. Now go claim it.
That's it for today. If this message resonated with you, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you catch tomorrow's message. Take action today. You'll be glad you did.